so it's my pleasure. I'm extremely actually happy to see Christopher here. I tried to invite him to other places. So you can have a look at his very impressive short bio or bios in internet. Just Google him. I just want to stress that for me, and for many researchers working in interdisciplinary programs around sustainability, he's one of the men, he's one of the guys who really inspire us, because he's doing real things in the field, not small things, large-scale things. And this is something we dream of as theorists, or as academicians, as people from the academy. So when one of our common friends, Sadi Lalou, who's a LSE professor and director of the Institute for Advanced Study in Paris, invited me to meet him, he told me, "Whoa, you have to talk with him." So I spent some time talking with him in the office of Sadi Lalou in Paris, and then he gave this fantastic conference, which actually was like a shift in the scientific policy of this prestigious Paris Institute for Advanced Study, because now they are moving from cognitive sciences to what you are doing. So the most impressive thing in Christopher's work is not only these concrete things he's doing, large scale in many places in the world, just check it in Google, but he's also interested in economic theory, he's interested in teaching, he's interested in technological diplomacy, he's interested in many things. So I think the discussion or the exchange with Nicolas Ma, who's actually doing similar things, but in more local situations, is Secretary General of this association, PIICTO, which is also working on something which we could label as industrial ecology. So we will hear you in 2 minutes. Just want to say hello to Alain Tranois, who has just arrived, because this is there. Because this is one of the first topics of the LabEx AMSE, that's the ancestor of the school. It's all global phenomena, and sustainability, global warming is a global phenomena. Actually, I started working on this myself, on the circular economy, inspired by this LabEx program. So I think the floor is yours, and we are all impatient to hear you. The topic is, well, the title is there, you can read it. So the floor is yours.
So thank you very much for the invitation, Dr. Jabari, Director, and Professor Abdulsamid. Very kind of you to invite me, and I'm happy to be here, and congratulations on the 10 years and the beautiful facilities, and not only the facilities, but I had the pleasure of walking around Aix-en-Provence yesterday. What a beautiful place. I mean, I'm sorry I have to leave early in the morning tomorrow. I could stay here for a long time, indeed. So it's discovering a new jewel in the France landscape is really a pleasure. And I hope to come back sometime and work with you and explore more. So this is a title I've invented. I'm a practitioner, not an academic. So I'm learning by doing. And then in order to keep doing things, I try to model so that we can replicate and scale and embed successful approaches and discard, of course, the unsuccessful approaches. So when you see the presentation, everything will be all wonderful and nice like a fairy tale. But in reality, it was, bumping your head and having some fights and pulling your hair out, obviously. So it's really a challenging journey. However, when you get that synergy, when you get that community effect, and you finally reach to a level where things are operating and indeed coalescing and attracting and becoming self-sustaining, then you realize, well, that this is worth, the walk. And you have to walk the talk in able to get there and take the bumps and be resilient. And I think resilient would be another topic of the presentation. So This is way in the middle. So, Cooperative Advantage. So that's just a sort of a theme I'm working with. And many of you recognize some theories like this, community development and systems development and game theories and so forth, equilibriums. This is a practitioner's view, right? So how do you create an operational and scalable system which combines all of these theories into reality? And in particular, I want to focus on the value and risk definitions. So you cannot do this if you just take my MBA book and apply it to these circular economies. You can't get there from one to the other. And that's because, as I look at it more carefully, and as I looked at investment committees, working with sovereign wealth funds, or I looked at the farmers in the community who are very, stingy and they get 4% on their hard efforts, it turns out that the way we financialize value and risk is too skewed to get to a circular economy. We need to reconsider it and to reorganize ourselves if we're going to make that transition. And just to be a little provocative, perhaps the competitive forces model is becoming more and more obsolete as we move into a more synergistic model of economics and development. But we'll find out. So I hope you'll take the little journey with me. I'll just set the scene for some of the places we developed and what's working. And then we'll go into some directional question and answer. Where does this lead us? And what kind of research do we need to do from here? So I'm hoping to inspire some research going forward so I can read those papers and apply them in real life later on. So my journey to get here began with a very large project in Abu Dhabi called Masdar. This is a smart city, a 2 by 2 kilometers smart city, and it's what I would call a top-down effort. So Abu Dhabi, oil and gas nation, obviously, still I think about 60% of their economy is based on oil and gas. They wanted to create strategic sectors in their economy to future-proof Abu Dhabi for the generations to come. And clean tech and renewables was one of those. And if you look at them today, they're really scaling up on this and really becoming a global player. But having worked through that with a top-down, very large budget, then coming to Denmark and starting with a grass field, strictly grassroots, no money, just an empty space. And then learning to model that, replicate that with the Danish government in North America first, and now with the Global South, with the International Solar Alliance. We're actually creating a model as we go, because we have to apply it everywhere we show up. And we'll get to how that is adaptable and able to work across different sites. So we're at a position right now where we call this, a just transition. That's a UN term. You might say equitable economic development. So that's another way to look at this. And the door of the opportunity right now is that we can do over. We can say, okay, we have burning platforms. We have economies which are not working well. We have maybe the end of capitalism reaching its decline, as we saw in other empires. So how do we reorganize, since this paradigm is all starting to come to its end of cycle? That's a great opportunity for us. And if you do this systematically and with conscientiousness, you can actually find other processes and other ways to organize your economics to get into different types of communities. I mentioned Masdar. So this was a 30 billion US budget. So they said 10 billion at a time. And when I joined the leadership there, they said, here's 10 billion, let us know when you need more, go. And the difference with Masdar was there was no recipe. It was the first time anybody had tried to do this. So I think we used 200 million before we started to get going even. So many pilot projects, 140 pilot projects. The smart thing we did was to build a knowledge machine from the beginning. So the first thing we built was a clean technology research center, graduate research center, which attracted people from all over the world to help us learn how to do this, a smart city in real life. And then we started building out with partners all over the world. And I was responsible for innovation and strategic partnerships. So instead of rebuilding the wheel, we searched the globe for what's working, what are people doing, what technologies are out there. Siemens has this smart building stuff. Total Energies has new solar panels and combine different energy sources, hybrid solutions from China, in fact. And we put them into this smart city. and money was no object. Just go make it happen. So this did not become a circular economy, but it became a clean economic model. So how do we then go to the next step and make something circular out of it? Well, we have a great example which happened over 50 years very organically in Denmark. So this is a port in the middle of Denmark, and it started with 1 or 2 factories. Some of you may have heard this site, Kalundborg. And they started to say, hey, I've got some extra heat over here, and you're building, a heater, a boiler, and wouldn't you just like to take it from me? It's right across the street. And it just started like that. People walking around noticing, oh, that stuff, I could use that for my gypsum processes. And it kept going for 50 years. And now, 50 years later, it looks like this. It seems like somebody designed it. But it's just neighbors, being kind and resourceful with each other. And then we get to designing the actual sites. So now you have some clean tech sector development. You have some organically developed interactive sites. So if you were to look at these examples and then try to design them from the beginning, how would you do that? Well, here are the elements which you do that. And of course, the first 2 you'll notice right away. The last one is really the key piece. Designing for symbiosis from the beginning. And from the data I worked with from actually doing this, we gain about 20 to 27% positive value out of doing the symbiosis piece. So considering the pipes and cables and storage you need to do that, it looks like a pretty good return on investment, in particular because it's a collective investment. So everyone's getting a share of the outcome of doing that shared infrastructure. And then we come to the other piece of the puzzle. This sector's clean energy is divided up into pieces, right? So we know there's a wind industry, there's a solar industry, there's battery storage, there's biogas. All of these things have industrial sectors, and they operate on efficiencies and new designs and optimizing technologies. But nobody's actually putting them all together into an ecosystem. Very rarely is that occurring. So how would you create these counter-cyclical and baseload and variable instances into one cohesive system? That's the challenge. And for me, I've gotten this far. Basically, you want to look at what are your sources of energy and what you have to put in the middle to create multilateral value streams on the other side. So we don't want the electrons, in fact. Those are not very useful. They just give you a shock. What are you going to use your electrons for? And if you start looking at your energy integration as an opportunity to create value on the other side, you start pulling some other pieces of the puzzle into this cohesive design. And suddenly you have energy coming to offtake, coming to value streams. And you're getting away from commodities like electricity. And you're getting into how can that value on the other side of the energy create a well-being for the community. And if we go back to why we created these factories, I think one of the best examples was Henry Ford and his Model T cars. So he created an assembly line to produce cars which the workers could actually purchase and use for their own well-being. If we got back to that concept, well-being for communities, why we do industry, then we suddenly get a whole different view of how to put these things together. And they don't have to be across oceans to do supply chains. You can start making cohesive supply chains by looking at mapping sources and uses of your resources on a particular site. So energy to value becomes the first paradigm of how we approach building these. And here then I'll just explain to you the one which is up and running, which I was the founding CEO. When I started, it was just the green fields you can see in the back. There was nothing there. And that was a problem. This municipality was losing population every year. Urbanization was pulling young people out to the universities. They fall in love, they get married, they move to Aix-en-Provence, and it's wonderful. Everything's wonderful, but where they came from, there's nobody to take over the farm. The industries are, shrinking, and the supply chains get longer and longer, and nobody wants to come out there. So there was a burning platform there. And I was asked by the region to go out and try to work with some sort of attractor, some sort of innovation platform to bring people back into the region. And that turned into this Greenlab case. So you'll see a lot of infrastructure connecting the dots. But I think one of the important things to realize is this is purpose-built infrastructure in order to enable symbiosis among these different entities. And the other side of it is we built the wind, the solar, the biogas, and integrated it so that we could provide the right kind of energy to the right process at the right time. A good example is you don't always need heat to do the drying process for proteins, which are you're getting out of the remains of the fish farm. So when you do fillet of fish, there's a lot left over. That's usually just waste or compost or something. So this is a good example. Oh, let's take that back and extract stuff out of that. You can get very high value organic proteins out of those remains, but you need to dry them. That's 300 degrees of heat, normally for natural gas, and it comes in batches. Batch, heat it up, dry it out. Batch, heat it up. You can run that when you like, basically. So how about we run that when we have a lot of wind energy, and we can use that to drive the heating process. And then we start matching wind against protein drying systems. And when there's not a lot of wind, well, we move the energy sources to somewhere else. So we have things like biogas, which provide some baseload energy. We have the solar and wind, which actually supplement each other quite nicely. And then you put some storage into that so you can manage the sources and uses of energy towards the processes. And then the last piece of this is to understand that we did diversity as a conscious design for the cluster. And why diversity? So diversity creates resilience because you can adapt to market swings. So a really good example for this is hydrogen. You might remember 3 or 4 years ago, hydrogen had a big hype cycle. I guess we all know these hype cycles. Economists must know those pretty well. So everyone wanted to do hydrogen. So we set up to do 2 megawatts of hydrogen, not even knowing who was going to use it at the time, but definitely somebody's going to want that hydrogen. That'll be good for the community. 2 years later, nobody's doing hydrogen. Nobody wants a hydrogen. It's too expensive to use a hydrogen. And by the way, it's complicated to synthesize it into methanol. So let's hang on a bit. Well, what to do? We repurposed it. So we could use syngases from pyrolysis and the hydrogen to abate natural gas in these heat processes in the different industries. And that means we're abating now natural gas with hydrogen. The reason we could do that because we did arbitration on the electrical prices. So we were able to use very cheap electricity to produce the hydrogen, which is 70% of the component of electrolysis. And that made it possible to create parity against natural gas prices if you did the right arbitration and storage systems. So now we have internal market and external market working for each other, because we could also sell electricity to the grid when they didn't have enough. And that's a balancing service, and you also get paid for that, and the prices are high at that time. So we were able also to do that arbitrage and say, well, whatever we make external to our cluster, we'll apply that to discount our internal cost of energy. So now you're starting to apply volatility to its advantage to the people participating in the cluster. And that creates then an incentive to participate. So 2 things: if you're a big factory, you need a lot of energy, that's expensive. And your products need to be CO2 friendly, at least in Europe. People are looking for that, sustainable products in their supply chains. And you have the CO2 tariffs building up every year in Europe. So people have avoidance, and they also have incentives and consumer-driven demand. How do they solve for this? So often they'll go into their factories and start renovating and putting new stuff in there and adding things and cleaning smokestacks. It's expensive, it's clumsy, it's not really very efficient. We created a platform where you can just plug in. So you don't have any energy sources, you're not treating your CO2. The platform itself is already CO2 free. And that means you're saving capex, because now you don't need your boilers and your heaters and your electrical transformers. Those are already installed. That means you're decarbonizing without having to worry about it, because the energy is decarbonized. So now you don't have to go through all that rework on your factory. It's plug and play. And you save time. So time is money, capex is money, you're saving both because it's an operational infrastructure. You don't have to wait for the transmission company to do a connection. You don't need for those transformers to show up from China in 2 or 3 years once you order them. So there's a lot of advantages, in fact, to designing a platform which is shared. Now you're sharing the capex, you're sharing the risk, You're advancing the supply chains by designing a cluster where you can plug and play. So, and that's a very nice theory. The question then, before you ask me about it, is timing. So do you have enough robust economics in order to get over the timing gaps? So I've installed my big transformer directly connected to the high voltage. My windmills are running, my solar is running, the gas is pumping out, everything's good. But there's a factory delay, 2 years. So now my offtake is delayed or reduced. Can I make it with the 2 years? What's my plan for managing that? That's what I would call a real on-the-ground risk. It's not one of those tables where you look at, all these line items. You have 2 years where you're not having the income to pay for the stuff you bought. And your depreciation is, 20, 25 years on these types of installations. So 2 years, that's a good percent. So this is where we have to get into the resilient economics of the circular economy. How do we challenge and work with these risks and delays, where you can work them into your economic model? So if you put in some of these buffers and assume some delays, assume some things don't work, maybe one factory shuts down, you realize two things. One is, we can handle delays. We just float them out over the financial period. That's doable, just to expect them. So if you're building a resilient economy, you have to also build a resilient psychology. And this is often the biggest challenge, is the psychology piece. So behavioral economics, I think some of you are studying that in this room. How do people make decisions? How do you perceive risk? What's your locus of control? Do you feel you're in control, or is somebody else deciding for you all the time? These are just your perceptions of risk. And a lot of the work we had to do here was translating to people's different languages, a fisherman, a farmer, biogas plant manager, financial people, investors, into certain types of mentalities so they could say, we want to participate. Please.
I have a question that is very related.
No, I would like questions now on this particular platform.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, it's expected. It's important everybody understands this model now, because later on we're going to be extrapolating from that. So, please.
So another, I guess, related to psychology, what about trust? No, in the sense that, in some sense, I don't mean to demean, but you move in with resources, right? In a place like Denmark, where there is a lot of institutional, trust, right? And then good citizenry and so on.
Yes, yes.
Suppose you came to a place where people are used to, catching curves, cheating on each other, and you don't come in with all those resources.
Yes.
You have to build things from nothing.
Maybe like the Middle East.
Right, for example.
You got to say it. It's a very transactional place.
But you don't have.
Yes.
But you don't have 20 trillion, right?
Exactly.
So how? Now it's another problem, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So you're building mutual incentives, and you design them for the context you're in. So in the Middle East, we design transactional incentives. We use things like IRRs and NPVs, and then we gave a range. So what were we selling in this incentive model in Abu Dhabi was global brand dominance. So you're first to market with these new smart tools. We're extrapolating on your own R&D and on your own platforms, which means you can be the Apple of smart cities. And we promote globally, which Abu Dhabi has the ability to do, with both our financial interactions, but also with our branding and our global relationships, these solutions to the world. So it really was a big sales machine. Just, like when you go to a conference, there's a booth and there's, hey, look, we just did a really smart thing, take a look, push that button, whee, boom. Just like that, just 2 by 2 kilometers big. So that was basically the value pitch in Masdar. And today it's a well-functioning city, working on basic real estate economics and attracting more and more participants, in fact, and building larger and larger renewable energy plants to feed into it. In Denmark, as you mentioned, it's a very conscientious land. So everybody seeks for each other's well-being. It's a small society. There's a low hierarchy, the Hofstede's models. They're one of the lowest, right? Where Abu Dhabi is one of the largest. Here you're just changing the value context then. This is good for community. It's as good for the farmer and the fisherman as it is for the industrialist. It's changing our energy system for the better. And the EU is always talking about sector integration or sector coupling. Here we are doing it. So the Danes, they were proud that they were taking the first step into integrated energy, just as they did with wind power 30 years ago. So in Denmark, we were selling this front-runner status. Hey, remember that wind stuff that went really well? Little country, big industry, saving the world. How about we take a next step, integrated hybrid energy solutions, and make that our next platform? You know what the advantage for that is? Every time you do a new solution out in the world, which is what I do today, you bring maybe 20 companies instead of one turbine producer. So now you're expanding your export footprint and also doing good. So we have this saying, do good and prosper in Denmark. In particular, AP Maersk uses that as their motto. Same activities, just different contexts and different languages, and appealing to, of course, the cultural values of that particular site. And this is a really good clue in as to how to adapt the model around the world. You start with the cultural values, you start with the community, you start with diversity, and then we do what I call aspiration coaching. So here we are. What could you imagine? Where would you like to be in 10, 20, 50 years for your grandkids, for your retirement? And doing that imagination process is really critical to actually installing all of this, because not everybody likes to look at a biogas plant or a big windmill turning around in your backyard. You know, this backyard syndrome I think we're all familiar with. Wind is great, just not in my backyard. I don't want that thing whirring around. In this site, we had no objections to any of the windmills. It's 13 very high, 150-meter windmills in a green landscape. No objections, because they knew what it was for. They had done the work together and said, what are we going to use this energy for? Oh, we're going to get our grandkids back in town because they're going to want to work in this place. We're going to get researchers into town. We're going to do competency development. We're going to rethink how our ecosystem fits together while we do it. So we are creating an attractor for our society and for the benefit of generations. That's a really nice incentive. That's a great reason to have a windmill and a solar park and a biogas plant. And then you solve things as you go. The biogas plant didn't smell too good in the beginning. Well, what do? We put a research program on it. How do you get rid of that smell? We have a solution. We can do that. It's not that expensive, in fact. So it's self-sustaining at some point once the community knows why things are happening and once they are co-creating the solution. And it's really interesting to experience. So I can recommend it. Other questions, I mentioned arbitration, integrated energy, plug and play, decarbonization, cultural values. Other questions about this model, this site?
Look, Christopher, we leave the questions for
yes.
For the end. I think it's better.
So this was the one question pause, and we'll move on. I need my timer. Yes. There we go. So replication then. This model is up and running in Denmark, and the first thing that happened was the US Department of Energy came to visit. We had people from all over the world visiting, and they said, hey, this is what we need in our outlying areas. We have challenges. We have invasive species. We have outlying areas which are depopulating. We have the same challenges. This can fix it. So they just made a short list. Where do we need the most fixing? And we started to go over to the US and start doing it. Now, in the beginning, of course, we called it green growth, clean economies, circular economies. But then we found a new word once the administration changed. Basically, bring the jobs back. So reindustrialization sounds a lot better today when you're traveling across the US. I can recommend that title, whatever you're trying to do. Don't say environmental, say reindustrialization. It works. Industrial cluster models, all these good language things, they're great. Even in Houston, Texas, which is oil and gas center of the universe, I can say, hey, guys, you want to keep that client in Europe who pays premium prices for all your stuff? Did you notice they want green fuels? Yeah, we did, but gosh, it's pretty far to get from where we are to there. So how are we going to do that? Well, tell you what, I've got a great idea. So the ports of Houston are looking at reorganizing their supply chains and their processes to get there so they have a client they can keep. Other version of scaling, so that was replication. Now this is scale. So the site in Denmark was 100 megawatts, and this site is 10 gigawatts. There's a port where the concession was up for renewal. So you have to bid for a 50-year operating of a port, big giant port in India. And they asked us, hey, how can we future-proof this port and generate more throughput in the next 50 years? And this is the model that came out of it. So up on the left, you see the original operations of that port. There's coal coming into the power plant, and there's ammonia coming into the farms, and there's a shipwrecking site next to it. That's about it. Steel, cement plants, shipwrecking plant, coal, and ammonia. And we looked at sources and uses and just started mapping it. So how could you create synergies? How could you create green growth, a future-proof ecosystem around this port and secure that sort of throughput where the whole world's asking for decarbonized products over the next 50 years? And it turned into this, which is one of the easiest, quick wins was just across the water here. You have Mumbai generating all kinds of tons of waste every single day. Things in the 100,000 tons league. How about you just start bringing that over, do the sorting, and use that to begin decarbonizing the power plant, which drives the cement plant. Maybe it's only 10% first year, then it's 15, then it's 20. But by the end of it all, you can solve the waste problem and start lowering the CO2 footprint of that power plant by getting rid of the coal. That's just the first step. And then the next step, obviously, you take it further and you keep going. But once you've done that, your cement plant has a lower CO2 footprint. And you can start using the CO2 together with, now we have seawater here, very convenient for electrolysis, synthesize hydrogen and CO2 from the cement plant into fuels for shipping. So now you have green fuels for shipping coming out of this ecosystem. And everything starts creating synergies. So you're lowering the shared cost of energy by reusing energy, moving it around time and time again. And you're decarbonizing because you have the different installations which will allow you to synthesize things. Another good example is plastics. So out of the waste, you sort out the plastics, you go to pyrolysis process. This is up and running in Denmark. So there's a commercial plastics pyrolysis in Denmark, which has now been bought out 3 years from start. Groundbreaking to operation to global buyout, and now replicating around the world plastics pyrolysis to naphtha, which is the input stream for plastics. So you have circular plastics being created through the waste, plastics waste. What does that do? That means you're displacing new fossil fuels. So you're using the same original fossil fuel for generating the next plastic. And Lego became one of the clients for that, in fact, because they're trying to get to decarbonize plastics. And you can see those loops occurring all the time. Another nice example was the brine to chemicals. So they do desalination, they do drying, big drying ponds to take the salt, which they use for chemical industry and other things. Here, if you have electrolysis, you can develop more potable water for the region, and the brine can be used to actually accelerate the brine development. Instead of just drying ponds, you now high concentrated salt brine, which you can use for the chemical industry. So all these circular elements, this was then taken up as part of the concession plan for that port. And they won the bid for the next 50 years, using this as their strategic plan for that port. So all of these things actually are commercially viable and are inspiring people to do things in a new way. And the last piece of adaptability, this is one of the things I'm working on today, Global South, in particular small island developing states. And here you take the same model and you adapt it towards these small island economies. So you want to look at the blue economy. And the blue economy is really actually underserved because there's so many extractions you can get from the ocean all around your island that not many people are doing today. There are also other opportunities like seeding the ocean with iron ore to suck CO2 out of the air. Those are being trialed in places like Tonga. And it turns out that seeding process creates better fish ecosystems. And nobody realized that that would be a nice byproduct of doing these things. So there's so many things we haven't been doing because we have a certain way of looking at things today. And we haven't been reimagining very much. And that's because our risk and our way to look at finance doesn't allow us to get into these new interdependent ecosystems. But it turns out they work pretty well. There's a growing network working on this. and developing technologies for this to fill gaps where things don't quite fit so we can get greater economies of scale. And that means we're looking at this Greenlab model not just as an industrial ecosystem, but as an economic development. So it's learning by doing, creating a new economic model, and then incentivizing people to participate in it, and being able to have a model that's well enough to replicate and scale up. That brings us into then the next segment. Looks like I'm doing all right. How many minutes left?
Well, this is the guy who's holding.
Yes? I'm calibrating mine to yours. 20. 12, good, okay. That's a minute per slide. That's more than enough. But why we need new economic models, it has to do with our outdated competitive forces models, our financialization, the way we put metrics on things which are not particularly showing the true value. This is one of the examples. Early on, capitalism was used to create assets, railroads, factories, all kinds of big things which were good for the community, utilities. Today, money is used for money. Since the 90s, that's just been going like this. So if you're in Wall Street, what's the easy win? It's do a derivative, repackage, resell, money on money. That's not the way capital was meant to be used, I would theorize. I mean, some people think it is, obviously. There's big chunks of society do. So how do we refocus that into actually doing value for the community rather than extraction for the egoist? And that requires that we have a new perception. If you say, and I've been to many investment committees and sovereign wealth funds, among others in Abu Dhabi, everything we did was turned into an investment proposal. If we had to install toilets in the university, it was an investment proposal. We wanted electric vehicles shuttling people around, that was an investment proposal. We wanted a health system, investment proposal. Everything had to be a number. And it got to be that I would just ask the leadership, okay, do you want this to happen or not? Because who knows what's going to happen with your IRR NPV in 10 years when you're doing something never been done before. So I'll give you the number, you tell me what the threshold is, and we're all happy. And we'll see you in 10 years, and we'll take the hits then. That's literally how Masdar got built. Because an investment committee is no way to develop a new ecosystem. That just doesn't make sense. You can't predict those things, right? So this is my concern about how we look about value. And can we connect value back to the assets which are benefiting community and creating actual value for the community? Well-being, I would call it. How do we get back to that so that even entrepreneurs are not looking at making a quick app to make billions of dollars for themselves and build a rocket ship, but are actually incentivized to do something for community benefit and actual value for generations to come? This is a tricky proposal. Turns out when we do this, then, one of the reasons it doesn't often happen is we're missing a role in between everything. So the windmill people know what they've got to do. The people laying the cables, they got a job to do. What about all the in-between stuff? This is where this value mediator comes in. You need a new role, a new operator within these ecosystems to do the potential shared outcome. I call that aspiration coaching. So getting all the stakeholders, all the elements of the economy and the resources together for about 6 months to determine what we aspire to together. Once you've done that, you have a very resilient process because everyone knows where we're going and why we're doing things. That means the community is fully engaged, their supply chains are tighter. They'll go through these resilient processes so that they don't just hop off as soon as things look bad. So this aspiration coaching, step one, that has to be a value mediator. I call it value mediator because you're creating value as an intermediary. So it's a phrase I coined during my MBA. A trusted intermediary, yes, that's important, but they're not creating value. So if you're going to create value as an intermediary, that's why I coined this term, value mediator. Design then the symbiosis net, the infrastructure and the processes to get to the outcome. So this is outcome-based design. And then build the business model, and you have to translate then. What is the farmer's language about doing well? What is the fisherman's language about doing better? What is the municipality's language about things going well? All that translation has to be done by the value mediator. And then you have to promote it, because you can't attract things that aren't there unless you're out promoting it. So basically doing your marketing and sale as a collective, and then get it to operations, and get it to the break-even, and then build from break-even. Everybody needs to get to that break-even, because then you start to lose faith. If there's no view to break-even in this new ecosystem, you start losing faith. So I would suggest this role needs a lot more study, because it's just an experience on the ground, and that's what Greenlab was. It was a value mediator. We set up a company to do this, which was in the middle of everything. So if we then apply that, compare the 5 forces, the porters, the competitive advantage, to cooperative advantage, we'll see we change very much our psychology about how and why things get done. So if you look at outperforming rivals by achieving cost differentiation, market power advantage, versus design for systemic outcomes. So you're not just outcompeting, you're achieving an outcome which is systemic. That's a completely different reason to go and do stuff. Dependency is a risk. I can't tell you how many tables I've seen where, well, if we got this pipe with this heat over to our fact, what if they go broke, or the temperature's not right, or who's going to fix it, or that's a risk. But it turns out if you do this at scale, there's a resiliency, there's an adaptability. Diversity leads you to resiliency because you can shift from one to the other and do counter-cyclical operations and arbitrages and demand responses, which makes your business better. You just have to have that in mind when you go into it and then adapt for it. So I would suggest that diversity in these ecosystems is your risk management, rather than worrying about your bilateral linear risk management. And there are several more of those examples which you can see. I suppose we'll be handing out the slides. Then the next objection, complexity. Usually I build my factory, inputs, outputs, I'm done. It's all streamlined and controlled. This is way too complex. How are you going to manage it? What about all these risks? What about dependency? How do I trust my neighbor to be part of the ecosystem for a long enough time that it will benefit everyone? And I suggest that if we just go look to the 18th century society, it was the same exact thing. People did a harvest, and the straw went to the person next to you, and they made beds and furnitures. The blacksmith, he created the things you needed to make your farm work well. Everything was circular. And people didn't think about it. It was just common sense. And how do you model common sense? It's hard. Because as soon as you model it, it starts getting less common sense, right? You're going from common to somewhere else. So as soon as you put a spreadsheet on it, it's very difficult to model. But I would suggest Greenlab is an 18th century society, just with new technologies. And the more we try to model it, the stranger it gets. But if you just walk around and do it, it all makes perfect sense. So then there's the behavioral piece, getting people to jump into the new ecosystem. And if you look at the behavioral economics approach to this, how do people decide things? It's based on context, it's been based on some external signals and habits and perceptions and so forth. This has to be a cognizant effort if we want to get from where we are to the circular economy. And I suggest that this backcasting approach, designing the outcome first and then working backwards from there, is one way to get there. If everyone can see themselves in that future, then they have a new frame of reference. That means everything becomes just normal as a decision when you come back to the beginning. And therefore, we're creating institutions for interdependence. If you design it for interdependence, then everything else seems to cascade well from there. But there's not a lot of models which say we're going to build interdependence, we're going to build the risk in because that's the best way to do it. There's a lot of fragmented approaches to this, but you don't have that unified, cohesive, there's a reason to do this, and we can model it, and we can tell you why it's good. And that's what I'm hoping you people do, because I want to be able to go with all your research and say, look, everybody proved it, it's a good model, let's just go. Send it out, everybody gets done at once. So what are the implications then for economic theory, which, as Raouf said, I like to look at now and then. Trying to unify the market design, behavioral, institutional, and complex economies into one unified lens is what we need to do to create a believable paradigm which people will adhere to and join in on. And we still have that work to do. So I hope and encourage you all to look in this direction. I look forward to your inputs and to your great ideas, and to, in a couple of years or maybe in a few months, come back again and work together with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christopher. Normally, Nicolas Ma should follow you, but I don't see him. He left. Where is he? Okay.
Scared him.
So maybe we can take a question, waiting for Nicolas. Do you have any questions, Cecilia, please? Maybe you have to take the microphone.
So a very general question while we wait. You talked about creating new markets, but you've got people like the Harvard philosopher Michael Sandel saying there are limits to markets. So have you thought a little bit about which markets should and which markets shouldn't be created?
So if I just take a step back, there's this concept of emergence, right? And that's the way I look at this. When we're doing these ecosystems, my question is not, okay, how do we get to the end? My question is, what wants to be discovered? So if you have that curiosity, if you open the window, so you're not line drive. I used to work at Accenture, and that was just get to the goal on time, on budget, close your view, you're in there, you're in the zone. This is the opposite. So you have to be prepared to discover the opportunities or the disasters as you journey through this and see what the emergent markets are. So as I said, hydrogen was disappearing from the hype. We used it internally rather than externally as methanol. That was one discovery. And we discovered we could do that because we tried to solve the problem, which emerged. Well, gosh, now we have some extra hydrogen. What the heck, we're going to use that? It's too expensive for heating. Oh, wait a minute. How could we make it cheaper? How about we do arbitrage on our electrical pricing, do some storage, and then have cheap hydrogen because it's at the right time, the right moment. And now I can abate at cost for internal usage, abate the natural gas. The other one we did was we had a pyrolysis of agricultural waste that created syngas. And the idea was to use it for sustainable fuels. Turns out that's pretty expensive and pretty complicated. So then they said, wow, gosh, actually we're making more money on the biochar, which had been certified good for farming. So it's a very, very clean biochar, which enhanced the soil. And because there was ETFs being traded down in Switzerland, they got the highest price possible for this carbon capture and storage application. So the business turned into a biochar business, and the syngas was a byproduct now. So they went from sustainable fuels to biochar, trading on the Swiss exchange for CO2 credits. Now what do we do with the syngas? Well, just across the street, the biogas plant, they need about 180 degrees for their carbon capture. They're using gas. How about we just build a pipe over there? And that became the business model. So they monetized that syngas, which is now a byproduct. They had the business on the biochar, and the biogas plant got to abate the natural gas for this heating of the alkaline solution for the CO2 capture. These things we discovered. We actually designed something else. And then the markets emerge. So be prepared for emergence, take it as a discovery journey, and be resilient in how you attach those solutions.
I think we have now we can move to the discussion of Nicolas Ma, please.
Donc merci Christopher pour la présentation. I switch in French because it's more easy for me to explain exactly what we say and we do in Marseille Port area.
When in France.
Okay. Donc merci pour la présentation. Ce qui est rappelé ici est très inspirant sur la dynamique internationale qui se joue sur. Alors je vais y revenir après sur notamment des places industrielles ou portuaires. Nous ici au niveau de la zone portuaire de Fosse-Berre, on appelle ça cette zone industrialo-aéro-militaro-portuaire, puisqu'on a plusieurs composantes qui structurent ce territoire. Nous avons une démarche d'écologie industrielle qui se dénomme PIICTO depuis maintenant 10 ans. Et qui s'apparente à tout ce que vous avez présenté. Alors pour fixer des ordres de grandeur en termes de chiffres, nous sommes sur une zone qui représente environ 25 000 emplois directs, un peu plus de 140 000 emplois indirecte, 6 milliards d'euros de valeur ajoutée chaque année, 85 millions d'euros de retombées fiscales pour le territoire, et accessoirement, créer de la valeur, ça crée aussi des impacts négatifs sur le territoire, puisque nous émettons environ, ne serait-ce que pour le CO2, je ne vais parler que de ça, 19 millions de tonnes de CO2 chaque année. Donc ce qui en fait le territoire le plus émetteur de France en termes de CO2. L'enjeu, tel qu'il est aujourd'hui posé, c'est celui de finalement mettre en place un certain nombre de synergies dans une approche symbiotique telle que vous l'avez décrite. Alors on a commencé à une échelle d'une petite plateforme qui fait 1200 hectares accessoirement, mais on a mis en place des échanges de flux de matière et d'énergie, tels que ça s'apparentait sur les exemples qui ont été présentés ici. Et aujourd'hui, notre démarche, cette logique de coopération entre entreprises qui s'expérimente, elle est... alors, il y a une approche bien évidemment systémique, hein. On approche ça dans la complexité des flux de matière et d'énergie. On a des synergies simples, le déchet de l'un pouvant devenir une matière entrante pour un process voisin. C'était vrai hier sur des bouts de purification de saumure, c'est vrai aujourd'hui sur du CO2 par exemple, qu'on laissait partir aux cheminées et que demain progressivement on va avoir tendance à considérer comme une matière entrante dans des process qui sont en cours de validation pour monter des usines de fabrication de méthanol par exemple, pour du carburant durable pour l'aviation et le maritime, ou même on a besoin nous de méthanol dans nos process chimiques. Les mutualisations d'études également. On a aussi beaucoup de travaux sur ce sujet-là, donc des synergies finalement qu'on opère dans la réflexion, plutôt en amont, mais qui vont nous permettre de guider des projets assez structurants. Aujourd'hui, nous avons mené ces 2 dernières années une trentaine d'études justement sur différents thèmes d'économie circulaire et de transition énergétique. Cette trentaine d'études, elle va nous permettre de préfigurer, on est en train de préfigurer des projets structurants pour le territoire, un hub CO2, un hub hydrogène, un hub recyclage chimique de matières plastiques en substitution de nafta, tel que je le voyais aussi sur vos slides. On évalue aujourd'hui ces projets-là entre 7 et 14 milliards d'euros d'investissement pour transformer cette zone justement en un territoire, vous l'aurez compris, très fortement émetteur, à un territoire, je ne vais pas dire résilient, parce qu'on a toujours été résilient, on est obligé de l'être, sinon on disparaît. Tout modèle économique doit avoir aussi un sens. Mais voilà, ça c'est un point important. Et puis après, sur l'aspect recherche et développement, nous avons, depuis cette dizaine d'années, accompagné une 60aine de millions d'euros de projets innovants sur notre territoire, avec des pilotes et des démonstrateurs dans ces différents domaines. Donc, il est une chose de penser à des usines très massives, mais on ne va pas les monter du jour au lendemain. Il nous faut expérimenter, et c'est, je pense, ce que vous présentez également dans votre présentation. Maintenant, les questions qui peuvent se poser... quand j'ai pris un certain nombre de notes, alors le fait d'arriver déjà à structurer des trajectoires à la fois de décarbonation mais également de meilleure gestion des ressources pour un territoire. C'est facile à dire, c'est plus difficile à faire, c'est encore plus difficile à expliciter au plus grand nombre. Ce que nous avons besoin aujourd'hui d'atteindre, c'est le fait de faire transpirer finalement ces mouvements du territoire, ces mutations vers le grand public, des publics non experts, qui ont besoin de s'inscrire aussi, de s'approprier ce récit des transformations qui s'opèrent au niveau du territoire. Sinon, il en va d'une moindre acceptabilité, parce que là, on est encore face à un territoire qui aujourd'hui a l'impression de subir ce qu'est un territoire industrialo, je l'ai dit, aéroportuaire. Donc là, j'ai quelques questions par rapport à ça. C'est, selon vous, les questions qui sont, enfin, je le vois apparaître là, quelles sont les conditions de mise en initiative, déjà, mise en mouvement de ces écosystèmes et de ces synergies avec différents aspects, techniques, environnementales, réglementaires, organisationnels. Et là, je pense qu'une école comme celle-là a tout intérêt à pouvoir se pencher sur ce type de sujet. Quid du partage de la valeur dans des chaînes qui s'avèrent être de plus en plus complexes? Quid, bien évidemment, d'utiliser des retours d'expérience internationaux. J'ai moi-même fait une thèse il y a une dizaine d'années sur les transitions socio-écologiques au niveau des territoires industriels portuaires de par le monde. Donc, j'ai une lecture, mais qui date maintenant, finalement, de ce qui se passait. Et quid de la caractérisation des externalités aussi positives pour un territoire, pour éviter de se focuser uniquement sur de la création de business et de renouvellement de chiffre d'affaires.
So, in my experience, and I think the first place I will say every side is very different. So it sounds like Marseille, the ports, PIICTO, c'est ça?
No, first Marseille. PIICTO Association.
Yes.
The name of the association.
Yes.
Gathering different stakeholders like industries, port authorities,
Exactly.
and public authorities.
So if you go into this stakeholder environment and they have an ambition to get something done, but you start with the fact that you don't know how to get there and you don't quite know what it looks like when you get there. You just know you have to make a transition, right? The translation then for each of these stakeholder groups has to be really tuned well. And a person like yourself, working with these stakeholder groups, would be able to help to translate the objectives and the engagement and the incentives for that particular stakeholder group. As we talked about before, power distance, what's the hierarchy? Is it an aristocracy approach? In France, sometimes it seems a bit like that. Back in the Mitterrand days, it seemed very aristocratic. It seems we're getting more and more populistic now. So you have to adjust for that, in fact. So really, in this stage, it's the communication and the psychology, which is the key factor. Because once you can help people to transport themselves into a co-creation mindset, into a vision of the future, which they had not done on their own, but you do it together, like we're doing today. Hopefully, we are talking together, trying to imagine a different future than what we came in with. That's the most important process, and finally tune to the people in the room. And then in the secondary phase, having them to affect and impact people in their networks and create that cascade effect. To finally, everybody's just saying, oh yes, we know we're going this way. And we know why. Yeah, it's good and it's prosperous. And that's enough. As soon as you have the mental framework and the psychological context to say, hey, this is good and we will prosper. And then they can put some sort of context around it. They can describe a few pieces of that, what that looks like. Then you've created already the outcome. And that tends then to, well, if we're going to get there, and we all agree on that, yes, good, prosper, happy, well-being, great. Then we're going to have to start this one and then that one, and we'll see if something changes. We have to be prepared to adapt, prepared for resilience. So that's the next level. Agree on that possible future, and then create the resilience layer. Okay, folks, we haven't done this before, so it's not like we just open the book, bake a cake, and serve it up. We are on a discovery journey, so let's be prepared for what that entails. We're going to travel through a forest we've never been in. There might be a tiger, might be a bear, might be a snake, might just be green leaves. We don't know. But we have to prepare for the journey. So we have our backpacks, we have our safety gear. You actually put on the clothes of taking the journey of discovery. And that resilience psychology and resilience about taking a journey where you don't know about everything that's going to happen, that's really the critical element of getting there. And that gets you to then step one. Let's take some quick wins. Let's say some showcases. Where has it been done before? Seeing is believing. So we always said, show it, don't tell it. So you can even do this discreetly. You might get some of the most engaged factory owners to say, okay, folks, look, let's just do this thing. You guys can take the risk, right? And then you can show it. And that's really the third piece of it.
So the maestro there told me that we have 5 minutes left, so we have to accelerate.
Wonderful. Well, that was the end of that tiny little question. So we can take the next one.
The second one is what was about value sharing.
Yes.
Maybe you can continue on that, and then maybe we take 2 questions.
Okay, I'll do the 30-second value sharing version. That's like a whole book. But I can summarize it. So just take that quickly.
Yeah.
So
just 1 minute.
Just the value sharing. So I'll give you a good example. The syngas, which was now not sustainable air fuels, but just heat, we built a pipe over to the biogas plant. And nobody really wanted to do it, so we just did that as the value mediator. Say, okay, we're going to connect you to, we'll pay for it, you just pay a subscription fee, basically. Good. And then we'll just deliver the gas at parity to natural gas, but what's going to happen in the next 10 years, the CO2 tariffs are going to increase. So now we have a tariff avoidance because we've decarbonized the heat on the one side. And we said, well, look, let's just divide up those tariffs as we save them and divide it among the three parties. So we'll take a little piece, 10%, because we're just a facilitator. We're not trying to make a lot of money. You get 20% and you get 60%. And it was cost-free. So we already designed a profit sharing for tariff savings ahead of time among the three parties involved, and none of them put out a cent. The value mediator put out the money and took that.
Okay, I think you have many things to talk about, but it could be in the coffee break later, so please.
I have a question on, you have depicted a B2B ecosystem. It's something I like. So how to build a B2B ecosystem that could have value for the society, and how you turn individual return into systemic return in some sense. But if you add to that the value for the society, or the collective value that encompass people value, like externalities, or positive or negative, how you turn poor individual return, poor systemic return, but with great collective value. Because we can find something when we decarbonize, the value of new technology is very high, and probably the return for those technology are quite low, but the value for the society could be high. And so how you can broaden your incentive or your intermediary for value in this between those industrial ecosystem, but with the territory by itself.
Yes, excellent. And I didn't do too much on the personal community side of this because I had to pick some things in the minutes we had. But that's really where it all starts. So it all started, and I would, the best word I found for this piece of the value is well-being. So what is well-being? And that's personal. It's community-based. It's based on the context of your government system. In Denmark, we have free healthcare. So well-being is everybody has free healthcare. That's a conscientious society. So they choose to do that. But then the question is the next level. Well, what's well-being for you in 10 years? Well, I'd like my grandkids to be able to stay here and work here, and where our family ecosystem grows instead of everybody just going their different ways. And we only see each other at Christmas. That was a well-being thing. So how did we do that? We set up an R&D center to start with. And I went out and got philanthropic monies to start a mission-driven R&D focused on solving problems on that site in that community. That means we had researchers now moving in, coming from universities, lifting the whole competencies, and teaching people about these things. So then we get into the teaching and the knowledge exchange, bringing people in from the community centers into the R&D center. So now they're getting a lift. And what turns out then, they don't have to go to a city to go to a university. They're in the middle of a living lab. And they can just stay there and build their families and build their communities and be close to the parents and even help out on the farm. So that was a well-being postulate for that particular site. And we focused on that, and I had to go find the funding for the R&D because I could see that that was the ladder we had to build to create well-being for people being able to stay there instead of going to universities.
So if you allow me, Thomas, our friend Monsieur Tranois wants to ask a question. So would you give us 2 more minutes?
Okay.
2 minutes.
Take a little, one less coffee.
So thank you very much for this inspiring talk. My question is both for Christopher and for Nicolas, and it is about the role of EU ETS in the successfulness of both in the Marseille-Fos port and in Denmark, because if I understand, you was talking about industry, about energy. They are covered by EU ETS. There is a carbon price here. So, and in fact, if you think about it, the EU ETS is a product of a cooperation of all the European countries. Okay, so it has not been, let's say, it is not a decentralized result. So I want to know the fact that there is a price of carbon at the European level. does it help a lot to, let's say, ease the exchanges between firms, between enterprise, which are in both parks in Denmark and in Marseille? Thank you.
Please.
Sure. Two sides to that. There's a carrot and the stick. So the ETS provides a carrot and the CO2 tariffs provide a stick. In my experience, building these systems, my interest is to disregard all of that. That's the easiest way to get things done. So if you just disregard it and say, okay, we're going to create a platform which is so mutually incentivized that it doesn't matter what happens going forward, you do it because it makes sense now. So we're back to common sense. Hey, if I could save money on my input streams by getting stuff from the other side of the street, doesn't that make sense? Well, that's an incentive. If I could sell my byproduct and monetize it to another person just 100 meters away, gosh, I'm getting more money for a waste product I usually have to pay to get rid of. So if you're designing the ecosystem well, you don't have to worry about any of the other stuff. It's just stuff on top. Like the next 10 years in Denmark, they've codified that they will put CO2 tariffs on natural gas. But that wasn't the reason we did it. We did it because it made sense already right there. And one of the big topics which has shown up, regardless of carbon and CO2, which is an invisible gas, nobody knows what it is security. So energy security and resilient supply chains are more critical now than the CO2. And it turns out if you're going to do energy security and resiliency, you're going to localize energy sourcing and you're going to use additionality, which the fastest way to do that is renewables. If you're going to wait 20 years for a nuclear plant or 10 years for a coal-fired power plant, you can in 18 months have your wind and solar up and running.
So 1 minute for the French experience, okay?
Il brandissait un numéro 1. Moi, je croyais qu'on était les premiers, en fait, c'est pour ça. Alors, du coup, en termes de réponse, le UETS, là, pour nous, c'est effectivement un garde-fou. Alors, selon la taille de nos entreprises, ça peut être soit un incentive, soit ça peut être quelque chose qui ne nous facilite pas du tout la vie aujourd'hui. Parce que, finalement, sur certains producteurs de CO2, le coût carbone n'est pas assez élevé pour rendre pertinent et compétitif des changements de process sur des switches, par exemple, de gaz naturel qui nous interdisent à l'heure actuelle de faire des réseaux de vapeur, par exemple, sur de la récupération de chaleur fatale ou, je ne vais pas rentrer dans le détail, mais sur de la revalorisation de gaz résiduaire de raffineurs. Donc, finalement, le ETS est une approche qui a son sens, mais uniquement pour certains industriels. Je pense que plus fondamentalement par rapport à nos sujets, ce qu'il faut faire, c'est pas uniquement raisonner par rapport à la seule décarbonation. On a un souci de maintien de la compétitivité, parce qu'une décarbonation juste pour la décarbonation, il n'y a personne qui est philanthrope, ça ne se fera pas. Et plus globalement, je pense que dans l'esprit des décideurs, tant publics que privés, c'est appréhender la notion de complexité dont on parlait tout à l'heure, et le fait que ça repose sur deux pieds, la diversité et la connectivité. Et que le point fondamental pour faire varier nos modèles, finalement, c'est de se positionner volontairement sous contrainte d'un certain nombre de ressources en amont, sous contrainte en aval sur un certain nombre d'impacts qu'on ne peut plus dépasser aujourd'hui, tant d'émissions en gaz à effet de serre que d'effluents, que de rejets solides, et également de consommation de foncier, parce que peut-être qu'effectivement vous pouvez développer au Danemark ou ailleurs un certain nombre d'écosystèmes industriels. Nous, on doit le faire en reconstruisant l'usine sur l'usine, parce qu'aujourd'hui, les effets de réglementation en France sont tels qu'on doit réinventer les choses en reconstruisant sur le système actuel.
Voilà, thank you very much. So we have finished. So you saw, Madame la vice-présidente, que nous faisons aussi de la valorisation et même du corporate.